You are now listening to Vigilantes Radio, presented by the Only One Media Group. This is the people's choice for quality interviews, celebrities and special guests. Hosted by Demetrius Dini Reynolds. Call in to join the mix at 701-801-9813. For the complete archive of episodes, visit onlyonemediagroup.com and be sure to like us on Facebook at Vigilantes Radio. We welcome all. Enjoy the show. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome your host, Demetrius Houdini Black Reynolds. Enjoy the show.
Hey, welcome to Vigilantes Radio. I am your host, dini-mussolini. We have a very special guest for today's episode, and this episode is actually pre-recorded, but hey, no worries. We have fun even on our pre-recorded show. So I just can't wait to get this particular episode to you guys and to your ear hole so that, you'll have all the information about our special guest and the book that he's promoting. All right? Oh, yeah. So what I want to ask you guys about is what person has the most influence on you? Well, that's a simple answer. It is you. You do. You're constantly talking to yourself, thinking to yourself, and aware of your own actions. No person or event can influence your own thoughts and actions anywhere near as much as you can. So how are you doing? What kind of an influence are you on yourself? What are you saying to yourself? What example are you setting for yourself? What questions are you asking yourself? Not just at the end of the day, when you're in a particular mood, but all day long. Instead of telling yourself over and over again, I'm no good at this, tell yourself, I'm finding ways to get better and better. Instead of asking, why can I ever succeed? Ask, what can I do to succeed? The thousands of thoughts and actions you take throughout the day have an enormous effect. They shape your attitude, your effectiveness, and your life. Use the power of thought to create the life that you want. Take that from me, dini-mussolini. That is my word, and word is bond.
You're live in the mix. Let's get this started.
Yo, hello, and welcome to another awesome episode of Inside the Music, or the book, or film, or even the business, where we dive into the minds of the people who create these marvelous things. It feels so good to be back with you guys once again. Big ups to my folks who are indigos, crystalline, or the starseeds, for my Vigilantes audience family, for my hooligans, and shout out to my people who are vegetarian or vegans. If you're in a struggle like me, we are averaging over 37,000 live listeners, and we've been at this for 5 solid years. I appreciate to all you guys who've been rocking with the kid on this journey, and we are still evolving, baby. It is all because of you, most definitely. We are the people who have dedicated their lives to music, spirituality, business, literature, art, films, and research in every aspect. And we want to allow you an opportunity to tell your story. Man, we've had celebrities on our show, from Grammy Award-winning artists, nominees, to actors, comedians, CEOs, technology revolutionaries, visual artists, from authors to professors, and vampires. Or people who think they're vampires. It doesn't matter who you are or where you come from. Come on our show and talk to me. So check it out to book your interview or to appear on my other show called Skeptics. Email me at V-Radio at onlyonemediagroup.com, and that's V as in Victor. We hope to get the stories behind these unique people and give them a chance to tell their truth to us and the universe. That is Vigilantes Radio sole purpose. You know the number to dial, 701-801-9813. Share that number with your buddy right now and tell them to tune in to connect with us or our guests, or you can hop in the mix directly from our website, which is onlyonemediagroup.com. Right from the home page, you can slap that go live button and you'll be here live in the mix and in the chat room with all of us. So feel free to shoot over some questions to ask our guests while they are here, but only as time permits. Sometimes my guests and I talk entirely too much. And as always, all episodes are available for free download, and you can grab them from either Spreaker.com/only one media group, iTunes, Player.fm, YouTube, any app from the Google Play or iTunes store, or over at our website. And that goes for every single episode that we've ever aired.
All right, guys. Well, today, on this 16th day of October, it's the formerly, the Colonel Stephen F. Rutz-Sr. interview. And again, I'm your host, Dini. So regardless of whether or not if I'm ever considered to be somewhat of a writer, I really dig this guy. Colonel Stephen puts a lot of thought into everything he has done in the past, and it really shows in this new manual. It's called Meeting the Needs of the Elder Population. Incidentally, we are not on a time limit, so, Stephen can go at any length to get his point across. If you were to ask me, putting your all into interviews is what each and every one of you should be doing when presented with the opportunity to share your ideas or side of the stories or even the backstories, which is what I love. Not just here at Vigilantes Radio, but anywhere that you land an interview. And 99% of the cases out there, when you're in that moment, you're not going to be edited, muted, or have things chopped out of your articles in whatever field that you choose. So please, guys, take the media for a ride and make the most out of your moment. The idea is always to help promote and create awareness for your work. And every time you give an answer that is short, it should be a mental trigger for you to want more for what you are putting out into the universe and to get in there with more of an answer. But guys, that won't be the case today. No. Today we're going to learn all things necessary for planning and elder transitions. It may save and even preserve life. We'll see. So with that, let's welcome Stephen to our show. Hey, Colonel Stephen, how's it going?
I'm here, ready to go.
Awesome. So we're super stoked to have you. Well, first of all, how are you?
Well, I'm doing fine. Looking forward to this conversation.
Definitely. Okay. So let's start from the top. Who are you and where you come from?
Well, I was born in Brooklyn, raised in Queens. Got married to my wife, who was born in Manhattan and raised in Nyack, New York. We then put 27 years in the Army, Corps of Engineers. And right now, after moving around 22 times, thanks to the Army, we have finally settled in Florida. And right now, we're at a continuing care retirement community called John Knox Village in Orange City, Florida.
Nice. Okay. So you migrated around the U.S. a lot, 22 times. Wow. And settled for Florida, which is a nice part of our country.
Yes, we're enjoying it. And believe it or not, for the middle of October, it is pretty hot down here right now.
Yeah. I could imagine. I'm over in Mississippi right now, and this is my hometown. And live in Cali, but right now it's pretty hot. Even with the hurricanes, I was just in Memphis last week, and it's getting cold there. But 3 hours away in Mississippi is still hot, 88 degrees.
Yeah, well, we're at 95 right now.
Oh, man. Oh. All right. So let's talk about the synopsis of your book, Meeting the Needs of the Elder Population, the Atlas Planning Manual. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, that's it. And its primary purpose is to get the reader educated to be able to plan ahead for the elder years. You need to appreciate what this market is all about and how it continuously is changing.
Definitely. And what kind of changes are you talking about?
Well, we go through the changes of life where we all have a quality of life right now that we're living filled with activities that make us happy. And our ability to do those things is based on two conditions. One, what kind of health are we in? And number two, what kind of money do we have in our pocket to be able to pay for this stuff? And those conditions, as we age into the elder years, begin to change in one direction or the other. The stock market was down at the end of last week, and as of I'm talking to you right now, it is back up again. With the Dow is over 400 points and S&P is up over 57. So these are changing dynamics in the financial world. And for people who are dependent upon that kind of background, it's good to understand what that means.
Definitely. So with this planning manual, what's the most important concept for you to get across?
Well, since I got into all of this, and I'll give you some background here shortly, I figured out how do I get this to where it's different strokes for different folks, and one size does not fit all. So I need some kind of a common denominator in order to get this message across to a wide variance of readers. And I concluded, since this is a planning document, an Atlas manual is a planning document that you take off the shelf when you're getting ready to make a trip. Well, that's what the metaphor of the book is all about. We are making a trip through the life journey of the elder years. And we begin up in the state of quality of life definition. We then transition over into the healthcare issues state. And ultimately, we finish up in the financial preparation state. And that's the flow of the book through 122 topic cities in all of these counties that make up each of these state conditions.
Definitely. Okay. Wow. And this is not your first rodeo with writing a book, correct?
No,
I have another book out there.
This is the first one that I had published with a professional agency. The first book that I published, I self-published in 2005, called God's Word in 21st Century Terrorism, The Revelation of September 11. And a quick background on where that came from was that for 30 years I had led Bible studies on the book of Revelation. At the end of each session, somebody would say, Steve, we've learned more about the Bible than we thought we'd ever know, but I may not be here when the end times comes and Jesus comes back down. And I got to thinking there must be some reason why the book of Revelation is the last book of the Bible besides the end times. And I thought maybe if I try writing a book that God will come visit with me and I'll find the pony in this dust cloud. And on September 11, I had 7 chapters of that draft completed. And now people who knew I'm working on a book about God are calling me and saying, Steve, what's going on? Is this the beginning of tribulation? Are the end times just around the corner? And I says, I don't know, because here I spent 27 years in the Army, never studied terrorism, and I know nothing about Islam at all. And I said, but I'm going to find out. And I went to my pastor, and I said, I want to do a Bible study on Islam and Christianity. I got no clue how I'm going to start, let alone how I'm going to end, but I'll do it in 6 weeks. He said, have at it. Well, after all the research was done and I put this program on, it went over so well, 3 weeks later they had me do it again on 3 successive Sunday afternoons in 2-hour blocks. And the punchline was I got the answer to why the book of Revelation is the last book of the Bible. The first 3 verses of Revelation 1 ends with the phrase, because the time is near. And theologians to this day, beginning with the disciples back then, believe that because the time is near meant that Jesus is coming back right around the corner. Here it's almost 2,000 years later, and he hadn't come back down yet. What time is near? My time is near, me to meet Jesus, me going up rather than him coming down. And I thought, oh, okay, the last chapter in any book exists for one of three reasons. One, it summarizes the story that went before. Two, it concludes the story that went before. Or three, it does both. And I concluded that the book of Revelation in the Bible does both. That's why it's the last book of the Bible. But beyond that, I got into why Islam is what it is, where the Muslim thinking is, since Islam is the largest religious population in the world and continuing to grow that way. Where are they going with all this terrorism? And so that was the back end of the book, was to understand what is terrorism, what is Islam, what are their connections between the two, and the punchline basically gets down to radicalism. And all of my research finally led to the conclusion that what United States Muslims need to do is reformation. And unless, back in the days when Catholics and Protestants broke apart, modern Muslims need to recognize that these fundamental violence issues in the Quran were not meant for the kind of offense otherwise what the Quran talks to. And anyway, that's how the book got published and what it was all about. So it covers God and culture, Christian perspective, God and culture, Islamic perspective, and why the book of Revelation is the last book of the Bible.
That poses an interesting question. I don't want to take away from the narratives of this interview, but I guess this question can also tie in with your new book. In your research, do you think the book of Revelations was meant to be continued, or a continued story, since the time that it was written, the time wasn't near?
Yeah, what I concluded out of all of that was basically that the predictions in the book of Revelation that basically people attribute to the end times are actually happening in our lifetime today. We have earthquakes today. We have tsunamis today. 2004, my wife lost a cousin in a tsunami that literally moved islands, is what the book talks about. Mountains will come down, says the book. Well, the Twin Towers is what was almost like mountains coming down, and that's what really got me into what's going on here with 9/11 and what's going on with Islam and all the stuff that goes with it. And that's how I went through all of this to say, okay, because the time is near, my time is near for me to keep the faith so that I meet Jesus, me going up before he decides to come down for the last visit. And I want my kids, my grandkids, to appreciate the fact that God has been working in my life up to the age of 70. I had believed that the life journey situations, events, were either an accident or a coincidence. And I woke up at the age of 70 one morning and I realized it was neither of the two. It was God working in my life. And I have a third book in draft right now as we speak for the grandkids that demonstrate this point of, from my age of 5 up till where I am right now at John Knox Village, that God has basically influenced my life journey. And whether the event was negative in my mind in the moment, there was a reason for it. And I found out what the reason was as the life journey continued. So God is the inspiration for me. He's the inspiration for the publication of this book. And it's his message. I wrote it, but he was the spiritual insight behind it. And that will get into the background when you're ready to go as to what caused the book to get created.
Oh, yeah. I'll ask that question later on. So, yeah. I remember growing up, like, every time the pastor would talk about the book of Revelations, that's when the congregation would get quiet. Now, as I'm older, the particular subject of Revelations isn't brought up as much as it used to be. I don't know if it's because just the way that churches and the subject matters are swaying back and forth between finances and being your best self and, the hope and faith thing. But anyways, so your manual, is it meant to continue on? Because I could imagine that the way that life is going, it's going to change, and it's going to constantly change. We have healthcare issues with being put up or being taken out by our government, programs added, programs taken away. Senior care seems to be a big issue with the government. What are your whole thoughts on your manual continuing on, or is the last chapter meant to be the last chapter?
No, as a matter of fact, that is an essence of the book. The subject matter is generic from the time of Adam and Eve. What changes over time and will continue to change is the business models that the industry uses to provide these services. So while the services are talked about throughout the manual as to what we're talking about here that you're going to transition through life with, you need to appreciate when your moment comes, what is the state of industry at that time in terms of the business models that they're using, what that's going to cost you, and are you prepared to deal with it at the time? And that's what the book is all about. And that gets us to what my wife and I are doing here now that we've almost 2 years at this continuing care community. Every New Year's Day, our life journey changes for one of us from where we are in independent living right now, that one of us is going to need next New Year's Day health care in the house. The next New Year's Day, we're both going to need health care in the house. The next New Year's Day, that health care for one of us has gotten so bad that economically it would pay to move into the assisted living facility for that one person. Now, the healthy spouse with in-home health care needs to decide at that point, do I want to keep this larger accommodation, or do I want to move into a cheaper, smaller accommodation since I'm now living by myself? And the scenario goes on until both of us wind up in skilled nursing facility on 24/7 basis. Well, what I do with this transition scenario is each year when John Knox Village updates its financial data for that year, I go and I redo the financial model for this transition scenario flow to see, okay, where is my future planning focused in terms of these events? And only God knows when these events are actually going to occur. I'm just doing it for modeling purposes, assuming the New Year's Day of each year.
Right on. Right on. Okay. What gets you out of bed in the morning to do all the work that you're doing for your book?
Well, like I said, at the age of 70, when I realized that God was driving my life, He's in control. And each day I wake up one day at a time and say, Lord, what will you have me do today? I remember back when I was working full time, somebody said, if you think you're busy now, wait till you retire. And I thought, there's no way that can be happening. Well, after I retired, I found out where the comment came from. When you're working full time, your number one priority in life is your job. Anything else that comes along falls into a priority on the back burner. But once you're retired, that job is gone. Now everything is number one. And now you're working on a project and the phone rings and, oh, Steve, can you help me with this? Yeah, I can do that. Well, whatever I was working on at that point goes to the back burner. And on it goes, one day at a time. You just keep working through life until God takes us home. And that's what gets me going every day.
Yes, sir. Besides doing God's work, which is always first in my mind, and of course you reap spiritual benefits for when you pass through, but what kind of intangible personal benefits do you get from doing like self-imposed work when it comes to fulfilling a mission like this?
Well, before I tried to 2 weeks after the book was published in 2015, we had a Bible study on Pharaoh's dreams. And when I got done with that Bible study where Joseph told Pharaoh that God is going to bless Egypt for 7 great years of abundance, and it's going to be followed by 7 years of decay and famine, that you needed to use the 7 good years to get ready to get through the 7 bad years when they show up. And after going through that Bible study, I realized the book that I have just published is the current version of Pharaoh's dreams. It explains what could possibly be happening in the future at some point of the 7 years right now, and what you need to be planning for to get through those bad years when they start to show up. And that's what the book is all about. And that's where my enthusiasm came from. But I got to tell you, finding the right target for this, and this is what this interview is really all about. Right after I published, I would go to senior symposiums and to a number of church workshops in Brevard County, Florida, because that's where I was living at the time we published. And I got very little acceptance for wanting to buy the book. And I thought, what the heck is going on here? And I finally visited one senior place in Vieira, which is a location that has all this different industry points of contact that you can go when you need to get something or have something done. And the director of that place said to me, Steve, I got to tell you, 98% of the people who walk through our doors are already in crisis mode. It's too late for your book. It can't help them. And then the co-chairman of our church committee that basically oversaw the research that led to this creation of this book, she worked for the healthcare department of Brevard County, and she said, Steve, the other side of that coin is that we've got a lot of people here in Brevard that are so well off that they can damn well afford to do whenever the crisis comes, and they don't need your book for forward thinking either. They'll just deal with it. They'll go to one senior place when the time comes, and they get on with life. So my target is basically those people in mid-economic America that are between 40 and 60 years of age, because they're the ones that are going to be confronted with the crisis, and they need to be planning for it before it shows up, before the stress level of that moment on them and their family shows up in the marketplace.
Definitely. So really it's the educational side of things, or being aware of this is to come is really the target that you're after. Because there are a lot of people out there who are misinformed or who don't even think about it.
Exactly. And how to get their attention is basically what, with Goldman and you guys, I'm now trying to break out of my personal failureship in this regard. And I say, God, what do you want me to do? Well, all of a sudden the phone rang, and it was Goldman telling me that every year they select 25 books that they think have got potential, and that my book got selected. And that's what led us to our conversation with you and me today. So they're going to try and get this thing national, which I could not do, and just walking around from church to church and senior symposium to senior symposium, which was very time consuming, and trying to get people's attention, just couldn't find a way to do it. They're too concerned with current cultural issues, and they're not ready to spend any time thinking about the future. How do I think about the future? What do I need to think about the future? And get on with it. And that's what the book is challenging, trying to do.
Definitely. Yeah, I could imagine that that's a workload from going to church. And of course, there will be new elders. The 30-year-olds will be 40, the 40-year-olds will be 50, and so on and so forth. Yeah. So from your perspective, what makes meeting the needs of the elder population accessible and relatable to those outside of its narrative? Like maybe the younger generation who have mothers and fathers or grandparents who are transitioning.
Absolutely. And what's interesting about it, now we're getting into what triggered us to get into this topic. In January of 2011, I get a call from my neighbor across the street who said, friends that you and Nita met when you first moved down here out at Patrick Air Force Base at the golf course are now in terrible shape. They're now living just a mile down the road near Vieira Golf Course. But he was retired Air Force, and they were in terrible health conditions, and all their friends at Vieira have given up on them, and we think maybe the military can take care of the military, me being retired Army. So my wife calls her up, what can I do for you? Can you take me to the doctor's appointment tomorrow? Yeah, I can do that. Well, that led to 3 straight months of 24/7 on our part, getting that family organized. We learned more in those 3 months about what we didn't know about the LDR journey than what we did know. Even though my father and mother were on a waiting list to get into a continuing care retirement community, my dad never got there. He's out watering the lettuce at 78 in the backyard, and over he went. I hope it's in the genes. God took him home. My mother got moved up there 8 years later before she finally passed. And my brother was in Connecticut, I'm in Virginia, so he became the primary point of contact for our family, the healthcare surrogate, if you will, because he only had a 2-hour drive and I had a 5-hour drive to get one way. Well, I didn't learn squat about her life journey during those 8 years, which is why I was terribly surprised when we got involved with this second marriage, kids all out of state. She had prescriptions from 3 different doctors. One hand don't know what the other one's doing. And like I said, it got us through all kinds of stuff that I'm not going to burden this particular dialogue with. But we finally got the family organized. We got one of the daughters, his daughters, to become the healthcare surrogate and the power of attorney point of contact to finally get in charge of taking care of them and get them organized until their life journey was over. She passed at the age of 87, about 3 years after this. That would make it in 2014. And he finally got moved up into Philadelphia into a nursing home that happens to be across the street from a school that daughter is a teacher in. So that's where that end of the story goes. But we learned more about what we didn't know, that I went to my pastor and I said, we need to educate our elderly congregants as to what's coming, because we were not ready for what we ran into. Well, that led to bringing in all these experts in these topics. And in my book, I have 122 topic cities that I refer to, each one which has got its own orientation across all of the counties of the 3 states. And these people came in and they gave us their pitch over 2 years in symposiums, and I videotaped all their presentations. I wound up with 18 hours of DVD, and I said, how can anybody use 18 hours of DVD to plan their future? By the time they get to hour 17, they forgot what they saw in hour 2. And I said, and on top of that, they know their stuff individually to a gnat's eyebrow, but the integration of their material with all these other subjects that we've talked about in terms of quality of life and healthcare and finances, they don't deal with that. So I said, that's why I got to put this book together, to tie all this material so that the reader has a punchline. And to show you it's different strokes for different folks, one size does not fit all. Each chapter of the book ends with the statement, what is going through your mind right now? Write it down on a piece of paper. Perhaps a future chapter in the book, as you continue to read, will give you the answer you're looking for. However, when you get to the end of the book, whatever you've got listed on that page of topics that you wrote down constitutes your personal life journey game plan that you got to get answers to, because your interpretation will be different than the neighbor's interpretation or somebody else down the street. And that's what the education process is all about, is to trigger people to think ahead before the crisis gets here.
Right on. And I also like and appreciate that you have touched on some much talked about topics, such as like the quality of life stage, routines, finances, transition, planning, and the most important to me, religious beliefs. Stephen, can you give us a rundown of each of these talking points?
Well, yeah, and I don't know whether you have the book in front of you. Do you?
Yeah, I do.
Turn to page 40. Well, while you're locating it, I'll give the lead into it. The cover of the book demonstrates the atlas planning manual like a normal map atlas that you would take off the shelf. And it shows the 3 different states with their counties. On page 40 of the book, the counties have the number of topic cities indicated in a circle for each one. And we have a starting point on the upper right into the quality of life definition state. And we go through its 10 subject topic cities, and then we go over from current quality of life, which is the first state, a county rather, into how that quality of life might change in the future, and that becomes the next county. And it's got 9 topic states. And then it moves over into the quality of life planning challenge as to what may be coming in our future from what makes us happy versus what doesn't make us happy. And you may have noted that I used Billy Graham's very recent book that he published at the age of 94 as part of the Elder Years Quality of Life Journey Challenge, and keeping God involved in your thinking as you go through all of this. Well, I then continue around into the next state, which is health issues, and we talk about legal issues because that's what I ran into with those friends of ours. They didn't have any legal documents at all. No wills, no estate trusts, no healthcare surrogate, no powers of attorney, just totally unprepared for their family to take charge when the time came to make all this happen. So that's where I begin the health issues state discussion. And I continue around into the caregiver rest stop. And what happens here is at some point, the healthy spouse winds up taking care of the unhealthy one beyond just an aspirin a day to keep the doctor away, to where more is involved here. And so he or she is now doing that. So we talk about what those issues are about. And then we move down to the fact, I call it the rest stop maintenance, meaning the healthy lifestyle person needs to have a little health care of their own, a little respite to keep their own health in shape, so that when the next non-routine issue shows up, they're able to come back into the game again. So we talk about what those issues are all about. Well, then I move over into a central county called in-home health. And on this document, on this graph that you're looking at on page 40, you will notice that the boundaries between all of the counties are dotted lines. And the intent of that was to convince the reader that these topics are all interrelated with one another. You just don't hone in on, the end point and say, I'm done. That's what my speakers did. And I said, no, there's more to it, that it drifts back and forth as the life journey flows. So I got 4 topic cities in there that demonstrate these interrelationships across the entire atlas, if you will, that says in-home health is focused on all of these dynamics as we go through it. And that takes me then into in-home services. What do I really mean by that? I'm out of the caregiver role here now. I've now got professionals coming in. And at some point, that gets so expensive that it's time to look at independent and assisted living facilities. And that is such a dynamic topic that I introduce it in 2 chapters. One, just general in nature, because these assisted living facilities can go all the way from the bottom of being a 3,500 square foot house that has got a maximum residency of 6 people and 6 staff members that are taking care of them 24 hours a day. That's on the low end. And then on the high end, you get up into the rest of what's going on, not only in Florida, but throughout the country, in terms of assisted living that you can either buy an entry fee into or simply come in on a rental basis. So that big picture view of what this topic is all about is what I get into in this chapter. And then the last chapter is independent assisted living specific. And now we get to where we started this whole interview about the business models that continue to change over time beyond Adam and Eve's topics on what is the industry providing. How much is it costing? How much is technology costing them with computers? How has that influenced the medical services that are taking place these days? And that's going to continue to change. And that's what that chapter is all about, so that people appreciate the fact that you don't know what's coming in the future. Yeah, technology's moving, and for the most part, it seems to make things better and potentially cheaper, but you don't know until you understand the kind of topics, questions you need to ask at the potential communities that you're looking at as trade-offs. What is this guy's answer to that question versus the other 2, 3, 4, or 5? And I've got 19 questions in the book that came out of our research to include what got us up here to John Knox Village in Orange City. And that is the most dynamic part of what this thing is all about. Okay, now we're ready to then move over to how do I know financially whether I'm ready to do all of this stuff in terms of what potentially could be coming. And so the last state in the Atlas Manual is financial preparation state. And it just simply begins with what is the notion of financial planning? What makes up a financial plan? And then I get into a couple of specifics that get into everybody's life journey. Long-term health care insurance. Do I need it? When do I need it? What kind do I need? And then the other side is if I got kids or grandkids, are their financial education issues somehow in competition with where we're going with all of this at various stages, which is why I mentioned those in their 40s, 50s, and 60s see all of this stuff playing right now, and they need to figure out how it fits across the grand scheme as they move into their own elder years when they got to just take care of themselves. Charity begins at home at that point. Okay, that leads me then into budget preparation. How do I know what my budget is? And we described that. And then once I know how to put a budget together, how do I analyze it, not only for tomorrow's impact or next month's impact or next year, but how do I analyze it into the distant future, 5, 10, 15, 20 years, as the case may be. And even us here at John Knox Village in our upper 70s, in our 80s, still have got we got people over 100 years living here. So future planning is still 10, 15 years out, no matter how old you get. And that kind of leads to the notion of a financial advisor in terms of people who can afford to save. And I talk about how I got involved in being convinced that I could get into a saving program. Here I got 2 kids in college. I'm still in the Army. We're basically paying our bills month to month. And a guy says to me, "You think you can find $50 a month?" I said, "Yeah, I can find $50 a month." He said, "You get us $50 a month into an account that will open in your name, and then you start adding to it wherever you can as the days go by, but you'll have a foundation of future portfolio building in place." Well, we did. Now the kids graduated from college. Oh, all that tuition money is now in our pocket, and we don't know how to spend it because our quality of life, here we go again, was triggered by what we could afford for that quality of life at that moment in time, and also pay for our kids in college. Well, anyway, that continued on, and now I start dumping a lot more money into the portfolio, and I finally retire from the Army, and I get into a civilian Beltway Bandit operation, and he now is going to pay half of my 401k insert. Well, guess where that all went? Well, here we are 34 years later, and if you take our current value of our portfolio, subtract from it the monies that we put in over those 34 years, most of them many years ago, and also the capital gains and dividends that they grew by, and now you subtract that out in terms of taxes that you've had to pay, as well as the management fees that I finally got into with them in 2006 because it got over my head as my ability to keep up with it. And I divide all of that out, and I wind up with, for 34 years, an annual return average of 10%, which beats the normal market target of 7%. The point is, you've got to make it, and God gives me the inspiration to go do it, and He's in control, and it works in every sense of the imagination. But the financial advisor was the guy that helped us to decide where we needed to target our models. They had 7 different models that called First Command Financial Planning. It was created, I'm going to say at this point, 50 years ago by a bunch of Air Force officers who woke up one day and said, the retirement we're going to get when we retire from the Air Force ain't going to get us through life, and we need to get a financial planning program going. Well, that's where this outfit came from. And so anyway, that's what got us going with all of this, and I've got all this written up for thinking purposes of those who will take the time to read it and say, oh, maybe I need to find a financial advisor to see what the game plan is. And depending on what your risk level is, you have got, in their case, 7 different models. It goes from the most conservative at the bottom up to the highest risk at the top, where if you put money at that high risk, you're going to make more money when the market's going up, and you've got to tend to lose it when it decides to go down. Anyway, the punchline of all that we've been talking about here is in the final chapter, final county of the financial preparation state called a Memorandum of Information Summary. And I began putting a Memorandum of Information together long before I ever got into this book stuff. The punchline was I wanted the kids and my wife to know if God decided to take me out in any way, shape, or form, mentally or physically, that they knew where all the formal documents were that they needed to continue on with life, and particularly with her life, my wife, and what decisions needed to be made and where they were going to go find information that they needed. And I began putting that Memorandum of Information together probably 25 years ago. And every January I update it for whatever's changed in our life journey that needs a correction. And the punchline of me finishing up all of this dialogue in this Atlas Planning Manual with that particular chapter is to say, this is why you're doing all this stuff, is that you can plan till the cows come home, but if it stays in your head, it's not doing anybody any good. You got to get it down on paper. And that's right. What the MOI, Memorandum of Information, is all about. It's getting it down on paper so that you now know, okay, here's where I'm going as God sees fit, and here's what you need to do when the occasion arises, and that's it.
Definitely. And I love research, or the research process behind documents and books and manuals. But what if someone comes up and say, oh, that's just Stephen's opinion? So what kind of research are you or were you doing over there to create this manual?
Well, as I said, the experts who basically represent companies that provide these individual services, in-home health care, temporary skilled nursing, full skilled nursing, and any of the other topics you can think about, the financial advisor. They are all making business decisions, and their salaries come out of this information. So this is not Stephen's opinion. This is what I basically captured in my 18 hours of DVD, with them standing up and speaking what they had to say. And basically, I just took what they had to say and put it into narrative and tied it together more in an integrative sense because of my own insight and my own life journey involvement with these topics. And as we went through it, and we would have question and answer sessions at the end of each of these symposiums that I captured as well. So that's where all the research comes from. This is not just something I dreamed up out of my head.
Right on. Right on. Okay. Well, Stephen, we always give our guests an open floor here to say whatever they want to say to our listeners and your fans, or people just finding out about you, through this podcast. So anything that you wanted to say or add on, now is the time to do that.
Well, I guess my punchline is simply this. I mentioned before, at the age of 70, I woke up and realized God was in control of my life journey. And in this book that I put together for my grandkids, I picked out a couple of, and the beauty is that when I get into my military career, and this kind of gets back to the piece we were just talking about, is that I incorporated my officer efficiency reports into the book, so that as my life journey in the Army continued, and there were concerns about and this is interesting, my ability to write in the early years as second lieutenant, how over my 27 years, how that all improved. And it was not my opinion, it was the verbiage of my rater or my senior rater that put that in writing, and I've just incorporated that through that part of the book, so that the kids can see that I'm not making this stuff up, that God is working in my life as long as I keep the faith and have it going. And two major events in that regard. We spent 6 years in Heidelberg, Germany. I had 4 different jobs. One of the first ones involved what we call the master restationing plan. It turned out that after World War II, our Army troops that stayed over there in Germany settled into installations that existed all over the country from the time of of World War II. Well, now I'm there in 1978, and they finally woke up and said, where we're all stationed right now, we're in a wrong place if we got to confront the Russians coming down from the east. And we're going to be crossing each other's paths and getting in the way, and it's going to be pretty hard to get to the front lines. We need to restation. And anyway, Rutz, that's your challenge, is to figure out what needs to get moved where and what's the construction requirement going to be to accommodate it, because the facility they need to be at doesn't have maintenance for the tanks or whatever the case may be. Well, I went through that whole process and worked with a counterpart in Des Ops, and he is the one who told me what units needed to be where, and then I had to figure out how to station those particular units in terms of their facility needs. And the punchline was I needed $100 million to be able to pull off this restationing initiative. And I went to NATO and I said, that's too much money, we can't afford all of that. Well, how much can you afford? Well, I don't know, you got to cut it down. Well, it turns out that a major general who was in charge of the Army Programming Office happened to visit with me at the end of this. And he said, the Army is already spending money to modernize. We're going from M60 tanks to M1 tanks. And he said they're bigger in size and their maintenance facilities are just incapable of handling the new load. So you can incorporate the readiness upgrade into your restationing upgrade and see what you can do with that. Well, that got me $50 million against the budget that I needed, and then NATO said, okay, we'll find the other $50 million and pull it off. Now, was that an accident? No, that was God working in my life that made that happen. And then I conclude this observation with my last tour of duty in the Pentagon. I'm there 3 months in charge of the Installation Planning Division, and I get a call from the Secretary of the Army's office to come up. I'm sick and tired of every time Congress wants to close a base, I reach into my jacket pocket and pull out all the Democratic districts. This was during the Reagan era. There's got to be a more non-political, intelligent approach to how we do this. That's your challenge, Rutz. Away I went, got 5 smart guys in the room, locked the door. I said, we ain't leaving here till we figure out how we're going to do this. Well, punchline came down to this. Why does an installation exist for the Army? Readiness. Be prepared to go when the balloon goes up. Well, for the Army, that's basically maneuver territory or large acreage that you need on an installation to maneuver around. Well, the tanks don't exist by themselves. They need the maintenance facilities to be taken care of. They need supply facilities to store both fuel and ammunition. That takes also square footage. And on it goes. And then the crew members got to be housed someplace. They got to be fed. That takes more square footage. And each of these functions has a dollar associated with it. Well, the punchline was we took the Army's 80% commanding budget installations, 154, and we graded them by weight structure. The acreage got 100 points, and all the way down to the bottom was administrative functions, got 5 points. You can do administration anywhere. In fact, we did some during hurricanes in motels. Well, anyway, when it was all said and done, in my general goes with the list from 1 to 154, and number 1 from the very bottom was Fort Sheridan. He says, what the hell is Fort Sheridan doing way down here? Mr. Secretary, where do you think Fort Sheridan ought to be? Well, someplace in the middle. Yes, sir. Steve, someplace in the middle. Yes, sir. Turned out that Sheridan was an administrative post. It just basically brought reserve recruits in, got them organized, and then off they went to a training base someplace else. So I just started popping up the 5 points for Fort Sheridan, square footage, up to 10, 15. By the time I hit 20, it went just over the 2/3 cut line. It's now somewhere in the middle. My general takes it back. Secretary of the Army looks at it. He goes, oh. And then he gets a big frown on his face. What is Fort Hood and Fort Stewart doing down here in the middle? Mr. Secretary, you broke the calibration of the model. Oh, tell him to go put it back the way it was. Non-political. He couldn't bust it, and I have no idea to this day what his interest in Fort Sheridan was, but it closed in 1993. They sent me to my counterparts in the Air Force and the Navy. Oh, Steve, we can do better than that. I said, remember, guys, non-political. They could not do it. It turned out that my methodology got implemented across the entire Department of Defense. And in 2016, I got an email from a friend that I was stationed with in Europe, who had a friend that was in the Department of Defense, who said the budget analysis, since this went into effect, it's called BRAC, Base Realignment and Closure Analysis, has saved the Department of Defense since 1990 $12 billion a year up into 2016. Talk about God working in your life. There's no way I could have come up on that on my own. And so that is my message to the people who read this, to have faith and just implement it and get yourself educated and let God lead you through the life journey.
Definitely. So, Stephen, Colonel Stephen, we have a tradition here on our show, and this is totally optional to you, but it is called our hot seat, and this is where you can display any type of talent that you may have outside of being an author. You could sing, you can do some poetry or inspirational speech or a joke or a story, or you can play a live instrument. Would you like to participate? Like I said, this is totally optional.
No, I don't think I can do that per se. It's just, I sing along with others, but I don't do it on my own, and I read jokes out of books that I inherited from my father when he passed, and I was cleaning out all his stuff. It's called the Humor Book. It was published in 1976, and we have a Saturday morning coffee here, at the end of which, after people have talked about their favorite sports teams and this and that, I wrap it up by reading, maybe 10 or 15 of the one-liners or short stories that he's got in that book. But there are hundreds and hundreds of them in there, so that there's nothing that is a favorite per se that I would go into. I got one, I'll tell you.
Okay.
Because I got this from him, my father, as well. It's the story of Archibald Barisal. Now, it turns out that Archibald Barisal was about ready to go to school for the first time. And his mother says to him, now, Archibald, when you get there, you're going to see seats all over the room. I don't want you to pick out a seat up in the front to be the teacher's pet, but I don't want you to be sitting in the back to be the visor guy neither. Pick yourself out somewhere in the middle. Yes, Mama, I understand. Well, turns out the little girl next door has already gone to school, so she's going to take you there and take you to your classroom, and you'll see what I'm talking about. So away they go, and he gets to the classroom, and he looks and he picks out the middle seat in the first row. Well, in comes the teacher. She says, class, this being our first time to get together, we're going to introduce ourselves to one another. She says, my name is Mary Smith, M-A-R-Y. There's your Mary, S-M-I-T-H, there's your Smith. The next little girl comes up in the front. She says, my name is Betty Jones, B-E-T-T-Y, there's your Betty, J-O-N-E-S, there's your Jones. And I keep going down, and now little Archibald gets up, and he erases the whole blackboard, and he writes Archibald Barisal. He says, A-R-C-H, there's your arch. I, there's your eye, there's your arch eye. B-A-L-D, there's your ball, there's your eyeball, there's your arch eyeball. B-A-R, there's your bear, there's your eyeball bear, there's your eyeball bear, there's your arch eyeball bear. A-S, there's your ass, there's your bear ass, there's your eyeball bear ass, there's your arch eyeball bear ass. O-L, there's your O, there's your asshole, there's your bear asshole, there's your eyeball bear asshole, there's your Archibald Barisal. And you're free to tell that to anybody you want.
Definitely. All right.
And maybe not.
Definitely. All right. Thank you so much for all your time and your answers, Colonel Stephen. It's been a great pleasure getting to know you and your work, and reading and diving in a bit to your book, Meeting the Needs of the Elder Population Atlas Planning Manual. And guys, I actually have the link to the Amazon page where the book is located, so it can be purchased upon immediate consumption of this interview.
Thank you, my Vigilantes family, as always, for checking out my podcast over here at Vigilantes Radio. All episodes are available for free download, and you can grab that from either Spreaker.com/only1media group, iTunes, YouTube, any app that's on a Google Play or iTunes store, or our website, and that goes from every single episode that we've ever aired. If you'd like to request music or a particular guest or send something for me to play, email it to theradio@only1mediagroup.com. If it's music, please label it by artist and title. Here's my disclaimer. We are genre-free, we do not judge, and we absolutely do not base our opinions on hearsay but facts alone. And actually, you can scratch all of that because all of my opinions are always right. That's the bottom line. This is my show, so deal with it. Nah, just kidding. On behalf of myself, Dini-Mussolini, I appreciate all you guys for tuning in, either afterwards or live with us. Spread the word because sharing is caring. We stepped up our game just for you guys and our guests to make sure that you have the best experience here on our show. Be sure to connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Tumblr, as well as Spreaker. We always follow back. That is the number one rule. Okay, well, just remember to be yourself and be absolutely great at just doing that. Avoid being too comfortable because you're messing with your potential when you do that. Peace and have a good night.
You are now listening to Vigilantes Radio, the people's choice for quality interviews, art, music, and hot topics. Hosted by Demetrius Houdini Black Reynolds of the duo No Longer the Hero. All episodes of this podcast are available for free download at www.onlyonemediagroup.com. This is a Seventh Sign Regime Rebirth Worldwide Syndicate exclusive.